eyes on George Russell as he climbed into that Mercedes number 63 for Friday practice for the Sakhir Grand Prix on the new short circuit. A bit more about that into the video. Not a fan, I got to say. But anyway, let's put that to one side and just focus on George. It was just so much fun just watching him drive, watching him climb in and out of the car initially. I mean, there was one moment when he was climbing out before the first session began, and his foot bashed the computers that they look at when they're sitting in the cockpit, presumably because the computers are slightly different at Mercedes than at Williams, but just bashed them, climbed out. And that's what is so great about George. He's just a normal guy going about normal things and has normal problems like everybody, but he made it look so good out on the circuit. There was a yellow light that came on the dash just for a little bit of time. Don't worry about it, George, it's okay. Of course, he had to get used to the dash because on the Williams, uniquely, the display is fixed and the steering wheel is separate from the display, whereas on the Mercedes, it's built into the wheel. Of course, he's tried all that stuff before. He's gone through that, the simulation. But nonetheless, when you're actually doing it out there, it would have taken a little bit of adjustment. He wanted more padding, of course. He wasn't going to get the seat exactly right until he was out there driving the car. He wanted to see the speeds as he was coming in, the speeds on the speed limiter for the pit lane. Just little things that we take for granted, but it's amazing to watch a new driver adapting to something like this. And then after 37 minutes into first practice for this Sakhir Grand Prix, who goes P1 but George Russell? But for me, the most impressive thing about George's performance today was the way it put Valtteri Bottas out of sync. I don't know what Valtteri was thinking about George, where he was thinking, yeah, he's going to be struggling to be within a tenth or two of me. He wasn't. He was super quick right from the start. And Valtteri, in response, was locking up inside fronts into the first corner. He was running wide in the new section at the top of the hill through that corner we were talking about, which is almost flat. And then into braking into the S-bend there, coming out, he would constantly be using too much road. And in the second session, which was held at night, whereas the first session was at dusk when the track looked beautiful, beautiful light, Valtteri did a 54.5, but of course that was disallowed because in the second session they brought in a track limit regulation and he kept running wide out of the chicane at the top of the hill there. So that lap, that 54.5 was discounted, and that's why you see Valtteri back in P11. Tomorrow will be another day and he will be able to think about it, and he'll need to go out and he'll need to get his game 100% right. The problem for Valtteri is that his game is on a very narrow path of road, whereas George already has a slightly wider sweet spot everywhere. For Valtteri to get it right, for sure he'll be really quick, but he's got to be perfect. And of course that leads on to another issue here on this funny little circuit, this 54-second lap circuit. And that is the amount of traffic because the lap is so short. It's just ridiculous. Personally, I'm not a fan of this track because there's one thing I think that's worse than dodgy guardrails or no runoff area, and that is slow cars when you don't need them, particularly if there's a blind approach. And we have one of those on this new circuit, just slow cars everywhere, partly because with the Pirellis, they've got to bring them up to temperature at the right pace, then they slow down, then they try to do another lap. Okay, at the end when they were on fuel, they were getting some strings of lap in on the medium tire, but nonetheless, it's really dodgy to watch. And I was not comfortable watching practice, to be honest, because there was just the slow cars, they're going slow slowly, and there's so much speed differential, and it was almost impossible to get a free lap, and that's going to be the problem in qualifying, one predicts. It'll only take qualifying to be stopped because somebody's gone off and they've put out a red flag and you've got 4 minutes to go out and do a time at the end of Q1 or something like that, and it's going to be mayhem. And I'm not sure that this is a good thing for Formula One. I don't think the Formula One cars look great on this circuit, to be honest, and because of that. And I think that it's kind of Le Mans speed differential type stuff going on. And I have to ask the question as to why they're just not racing on the same circuit as last weekend. It's a really good track, Bahrain, and we haven't got that wonderful 9-10 section. All they've got is a little bit at the top of the hill. Yeah, it's pretty good, but it's all heavy braking. There's not a lot of finesse required. It's all just stop, go, let's not make a mistake. If you got understeer, you got a big problem. And it's messy. It's very messy to watch. There's a lot of gravel there. And at one point towards the end, Pierre Gasly actually got hit on the finger by a piece of gravel that was thrown up by the front tyre, and it just looks scrappy to my eye, and maybe it'll get better tomorrow, but I'm not a fan. Anyway, first point to make is that, as predicted, Ferrari are absolutely in trouble still. They've got to take off so much wing to have any sort of speed on the straight that they're just sliding all over the place. Charles Leclerc had a massive lose in the first session. Sebastian Vettel had a massive lose in the second session, both of them at the top of the circuit on that very quick corner. Sebastian went off, I think, on count at least 5 times in the second session. Didn't hit anything, but just had no grip, front or rear. It was embarrassing to watch. It wasn't fun, really. It was like, if you want to see somebody going off the road and doing something, Sebastian Vettel's your man. I think it was very uncomfortable to be watching that. But oddly, though, in the second session, Charles Leclerc did not record a time. It looked as if he had some sort of power unit problem. But on the lap on which that problem occurred, right at the beginning, he was on a set of medium tyres. He was actually purple in Sector 1. About 2/3 of the cars had gone out by then. So he was obviously going reasonably quickly. And we just don't know where that was going to go to. And in contrast to George Russell going so well first time out in that number 63 Mercedes, the world champion's car. By contrast, Lando Norris had a terrible day, and in the second session was out early. Again, some sort of major drama with the car. So he was not a factor today at all. Hopefully it'll work for Lando tomorrow, but it would have been frustrating for him to have seen George just jumping into that car and going as well as he did. The Racing Points didn't look great in the first session, partly because they did quite a lot of running on the hard tyre when the track didn't have a lot of grip. Most of the other runners were just running softs all the way through. But in the second session, Sergio Perez looked really good. And right now, you'd have to say that car, that driver, looks like a potential podium finisher. Against that, Max Verstappen complaining, like Alex Albon, of a lot of understeer in the Red Bull Honda. And in addition to that hopping that he was talking about last weekend when he said the car is like a kangaroo hopping out of turn 1. They sort of got on top of that, but the understeer did not go away. So it's a difficult time for Red Bull, and they are not super quick on the straight either compared with the Mercedes runners. As I said in the preview to this, it is all about power. 60% full throttle around this lap of the Sakhir Grand Prix. So George Russell was quickest in the first session from the 2 Red Bulls, and in the second session he was quickest again if you take Valtteri Bottas's time away, which of course you got to do because he was using more racetrack in order to do it. Esteban Ocon looked very good for Renault, finished the second session P4 and was very quick with fuel on board as well. And Daniel Kvyat looked good in the AlphaTauri Honda. Pierre Gasly, a fair to middling day. He's right there. There's a couple of odd incidents though. So at one point, the mirror on the AlphaTauri came loose. And interestingly, he had to hold it as he was driving back into the pits to make sure it didn't fall down. But he held it with his left hand. It was the right-hand mirror, and he was doing this, driving like this, rather than that. And I wondered if there's a reason for that. I've got to think about that one. It's a bit like people, when they're on the phone, sometimes they do this or this. I can understand that maybe the hearing in both ears isn't equal, but if you want to hear in this ear, surely you would do that or that. Anyway, Pierre Gasly, weird thing. And then he had that incident with the gravel and the finger in the second session. So a fairly eventful day for Pierre Gasly. Meanwhile, Sergio Perez had a bit of the onboard camera come off in the cockpit. But going back to the circuit, I think my main problem with this is that we're coming out of that horrendous accident from which Romain Grosjean miraculously escaped. And you can see in another video we put out today, you can listen to Romain talking about the moment when the car came to rest, what went through his mind, when he felt trapped and how he got out of the car. That's on another video. And it's quite emotional listening to that. And he expresses himself incredibly well. I think particularly when he gets to the point where he's saying, suddenly I just felt very calm and I started to think clearly as a result, and moved his head enough to be able to get out through the cockpit of the car. One thing I should add about that is that he's explained now why there was no shoe or boot on his left foot, and that was because he had to sort of get his foot out of the footwell area, and as I thought, his foot had been trapped there. But the other point is that he explained why he moved to the right and why he had that collision with Daniel Kvyat. And he said because he'd got a really good run out of turn 2, which is the exit of that first little chicane at the end of the first straight, and had the momentum and wanted to move a bit to the right because there's quite a lot of debris and stuff going off on the left. And whilst he had that great exit, he'd been looking in his mirrors to see if there was anything on his right, and the track was absolutely clear. So he had no problem at all in moving to the right. He then said later on. It's not in the video. But of course, what I hadn't realized is I had a blind spot in the mirror there and I couldn't see Kvyat at any point. And I just rode straight into Daniel Kvyat. It's very difficult, he said, to see in the mirrors of a modern Grand Prix car. So that, to me, ultimately was the cause of the accident. The lack of the inability to be able to see everything you need to see in the mirror of these very high-tech, cutting-edge, at the edge of the precipice Formula One cars. We can't see, the drivers can't see everything that's behind them. And that is completely wrong, I think. And a week later now, with all that in mind, we're going to a circuit where, certainly in practice and qualifying, there's going to be massive speed differentials between fast and slow cars, and potentially in the race with cars being lapped. Okay, when they're getting lapped in the race, it's slightly different, but the frequency with which the quick runners will be catching the tail enders, and indeed the frequency and the speed differential we're seeing in practice and qualifying, to me, to the backdrop of Romain Grosjean saying that he, even in good conditions, relatively good conditions, he couldn't see Daniel Kvyat in his mirrors, is pretty worrying. And that's why I'm not a fan of this circuit. Any circuit that brings speed differential and problems of potentially hitting another car into play, I think we need to really be careful of. That's the worst sort of accident. When a quick car hits a slower car, it's a horrendous thing. Carlos Sainz had another synchro gear problem. Remember in the Bahrain Grand Prix, he had a big moment in qualifying when the rears locked when he's going down through the gears. Well, he had the same thing again today. I wonder if we had mechanical gear shifts of the old type with the clutch and the pedal on the left, whether Carlos Sainz would fall into the Michele Alboreto category of a silky smooth, knife through butter, perfectly synchronized gear changer, or whether he would be what Ken Tyrrell would describe as hard on dog rings. I'll leave you to make your mind up about that one. I should also mention the two young rookies, Pietro Fittipaldi standing in for Romain Grosjean and Jack Aitken replacing George Russell at Williams. Pietro, I think, did a pretty good job. He was 0.4 slower than Kevin Magnussen, admittedly quite a long lap, but 0.4, not that bad. And Jack Aitken was half a second slower than Nicholas Latifi. He looked a little bit lost in the Williams, but it was only Friday, so let's make another judgment on Saturday. The data that was put out by F1 predicts that Valtteri Bottas at the moment will take the pole from George Russell, Max Verstappen, Esteban Ocon and Sergio Perez. Probably Ocon, I think, will be up there. I think Sergio will be right up there, as I say. Valtteri Bottas ahead of George Russell? Well, I'll have to wait and see. Doesn't look that way at the moment. Right now, George Russell doesn't appear to be doing anything wrong whatsoever. While everybody else is hitting the gravel, running wide, doing this, doing that, locking up, he's getting in that car, he's getting himself accustomed, and he's driving beautifully. Great.